And whatever you do, you can bring the horses to the water on a website, but you can't make them drink.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Quiz Marketing Podcast. I'm excited for today's conversation because I'm here with Moby Siddique. Moby is the founder at RedPandas Digital, and we first chatted like 7 or 8 years ago, a wild amount of time on the internet, about quizzes. I was on your podcast. So then I was like, you should come on my podcast and talk about what you've been doing with quizzes. So thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Real pleasure, Josh. It's been a long time between drinks and it feels like I'm chatting to a friend. So pleasure being here.
Likewise. This is a good vibe. So I'm just going to kick this off because I actually don't know the answer to this question. What are all the ways or some of the main ways that you've been using quizzes since we last spoke?
Yeah, I would say the 80/20, like the biggest 80% of what we've been using, specifically the Interact tool for, is doing more with less. So what do I mean by that? So I've often said, Josh, like SEO and Google Ads and whatever you do, you can bring the horses to the water on a website, but you can't make them drink. So in terms of, one of the biggest problems we see when we look at websites, they'll have like buy now, inquire now, and nothing in between that and someone who's not quite ready. So 80% of what we've been using Interact for is, I guess, conversion, right? So like if I can give you a couple of examples now, one of my clients, they do printing, like bespoke printing stuff. So we help them create an anti-spiking drinks cover pricing calculator. And we were able to do that with the tool. A solar client of ours, are solar panels even worth it for your home? And I'll leave it at those two, but there's a whole bunch that we've got. So with the solar one, for example, everyone else is like, okay, buy now or leave type of thing. We're like, well, hey, are they even worth it for your home? Like what system is right for you? So just sort of empowering them. So that's probably been 80%, Josh. And then the 20% has been like a little bit of lead gen and fooling around with like Facebook ads, that type of thing.
That's awesome. That's really cool. I mean, I don't know if I feel like the ether of the internet just kind of brings everybody to the same place, but I've said basically the same stuff for so long. And a lot of times people don't listen to me. So if you're listening to this episode, listen to Moby. If you don't listen to me. I'm curious though, I think some of the pushback that I've gotten with approaching it that way, where it's like a secondary call to action, is people don't want to lose the sales from the primary call to action. They're like, oh, well, if I add that quiz or add something else as a call to action, does that mean less people are going to buy? Do you have data on that, or how do you handle that when you're working with clients?
It's quite interesting, right? It's like it's very much is an unfounded fear, because don't quote me on it. I'm sure someone on the internet will correct me, but like say it's half, right? The half of the people who bounce, there's again, it's a percentage, but don't worry about that, whether it's half or not. They're never going to come back, Josh. Like they're never going to come back. So and we know this ourselves. Like no one likes to be sold to. One of the big trends we've noticed over the last 10 years, and it's going to continue, is the selfless buying experience. People don't want to be sold to. They don't want to talk to someone. They're not ready to buy right now. But that doesn't mean they're not interested. Like how many times, Josh, have you jumped onto something and left your tab open on your phone or your desktop because you're not ready to buy yet? So I think it's the wrong way to look at it. The way to look at it is, okay, cool. There's a percentage of my audience who are ready to buy now. They will buy. But then there's a percentage of our audience that, they need more education or they need some nudging. So I often sort of say to clients, it's like, think about what decision do they need to make at this point. The biggest, people think like the biggest point of a web page is to convert. It's not actually. It's to get the second click. So what does that second click look like? So if it can, so of course, what your bottom of funnel is. Everyone does. That's why they're in business. But what are some other questions they might have, right? So for example, one of the spaces we work in quite a lot is the medical space. And one of our most popular courses has been for a urologist. And we've got a quiz like, do you think you have erectile dysfunction? So like, here's a tool. So think about this, right? Here's a tool where men are all like, we should be more like women. Like men don't like to talk about their problems, don't like to jump into stuff. They're already so shy. They don't want to speak to someone. So you're talking to a person who's not sure, they have some insecurities, some fears. Let's kind of educate and nurture them with some content, help them on their day, and then they're more likely to convert. The only, like, if someone's like, oh, yeah, but maybe I'm not in the erectile dysfunction industry, that's fine. But you do have people who are not ready to buy yet. So there's and by the way, you say, Josh, like, oh, what if they go on the secondary call to action? Great, that's fine, because guess what? We're going to take their email address and we're going to make the number, maybe we make it mandatory, maybe we make it optional. I do different things for different clients, but we give them the option for the number. And if they want to buy it, they're going to put their number there because they know you're going to call them. So it's a moot point in my mind.
That's a great answer. I'm probably going to use that. You said one thing there that stood out to me, which is what are the questions that they have? And I like that you said questions, because a lot of times when I'm talking to a client, I'll talk about what's the main question that somebody might have that comes to your website. But I think thinking about those secondary and even tertiary questions, that opens up opportunities to have quizzes, like not only on the homepage, but on like specific blog pages or high traffic pages, where you could answer further questions, or even create a hub of quizzes where you have like, it's almost like a interactive FAQ, I guess. Have you seen cases where you've used quizzes in like multiple places on a site to answer questions like in the moment? Like they're on this page, they probably have this question, let's make a quiz about.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen, so one of the things that I like doing with my clients is like showing them other people in the industry who are doing things that are, because everyone wants to know what the Joneses are doing, right? It's one of the
Yeah.
easiest ways to, if they don't listen to you, like, oh, my competitor's doing it. So I mentioned that solar client before, and one of it's funny, I call them a competitor, but they are and they're not. So I know it's a sidebar, Josh, but one of the best industries you find who promote and market is people have nothing to sell. What do I mean by that? Like directories and aggregators. So my solar client, they technically do compete with an aggregator. So the aggregator has a bunch of information, they blog. And the point I was going to make is they have a lot of quizzes. They've got a quiz for everything. They've got a page of quizzes. So I remember sharing that with my clients, saying, like, look what they're doing. They got a quiz for top of funnel, like, is solar even right for me? Okay. Middle of funnel, right? And that could be another page. Solar's right for you, but you don't know which system. Okay, so which system is right for me? Then you might have another stage, like what to ask your solar installer based on your criteria. So I guess the short answer to your question is, like, yes, absolutely. And again, I don't know what industry the listeners are listening from, but one of the best marketers you will find, aggregators, and they use quizzes a lot because they've got nothing to sell, Josh. So they're not trying to sell products or services like us. They're trying to aggregate stuff and then push people to the highest bidder. But yeah, again, so like a service page, someone's going to be further down. So it can be a question that would be further down in the decision-making process. And homepage might be something that's a bit more high level. So yeah, I think it's a great idea.
That's a good point. I think looking at people who have nothing to sell because they have to sell a lot more in order to make money. Like if they're not selling their own products, then they've got to be much sharper with their strategy. That's a good one. And then what that made me think about though is, what's your process when you're working with a client? Because I know it all sounds great, right? You're like, okay, I have this page about solar options. Let's make a quiz out of it. But that's where most people get stuck. It's like, well, how does that actually work? So do you have a standard process that you go through? Do you do it with your clients? Do you just do it on your side and just kind of present the quiz to them? Like, what's your flow like when you're working with a client?
Yeah, really great question. I'm glad you asked, because like I missed a really key detail there. Is we can do the best we can, and yes, you do ask people at the coalface. You do ask sales. People who are interfacing with the customers. You should and need to ask those people in terms of the questions clients ask. But we need to do our research, right? Like you look at any great startup, they do like a crazy amount of research before they even release their first product, right? So like take a page out of their book. And actually, like one of the big things that I recommend, especially my clients who have sales reps, is record all your sales calls. Like that is like, I don't know why people don't do that. Once you start doing it, you never go back. So when you have this data, you record sales calls. If you don't have that, maybe in e-commerce, fine. Inquiry forms as well. So start with some primary sources of information in terms of, okay, what are people asking? What do they ask us all the time? Because guess what? For every one person that asks you a question, there's probably 10 that didn't even ask that question. And they went to someone else who answered it for them. So, the first step is always like, okay, what's the objective? What are we trying to achieve? And normally it's lead gen, normally it's sales, normally it's trying to increase the pipeline, or at least the nurturing pipeline. That's step one. And then step two is like looking at some primary sources of data, and then from there you go into your strategy and what that looks like. But before you even do those first two steps, there's no point even thinking about what type of quizzes should we do.
100% agree with you on that. I use that same line. I'm like, if one person asked, there's at least 10 others that asked or didn't ask, they just went somewhere else, or they didn't even know that they wanted to ask and then they just left without even staying on the
Yeah.
page because they didn't see their answer.
The other thing that, and sorry to interrupt you there, the other thing that does is people, clients, me, you, like as people, we have this tendency to look at what the Joneses are doing. So if you don't do that, there's a big risk you get distracted by other people in the industry. And you're like, okay, cool. Let me look at the 5 best competitors out there. Or they're not even competitors. They're in an adjacent. You think you're really creative, and you're going to find an adjacent industry, right? That's still not good enough, because you're just going to base it off the echo chamber of what everyone else is saying. Like, nothing quite beats getting that primary data. And yes, unless you do that, you're just going to be a me too of whatever your industry is in operating it, like everyone else. And that's not how you get cut through.
I agree with that, and that's a really good point that I see a lot of too in every industry. You look at all the websites, and it's clear that they all are copying each other, and then it's like, well, you're probably missing a huge part of the audience with that messaging because you all just copied each other instead of talking to the primary source, which is the actual customer, to understand like, okay, what are they asking about? What do they want? What are they trying to do? What are their goals? What are their dreams? Like all these things that go beyond just the surface level stuff, which is where you get the real good information from, not just like the basic high level stuff. So it's a very, very good point. So when you're working with a client, do you go and do that research on their behalf, like talk to their customers, gather that data? I guess what I'm trying to get at is like, where are you surfacing the ideas for these quizzes if you're working with a client and you're going to say, let's build a quiz for XYZ? Where are you getting those ideas from?
Definitely depends on the type of client and what they've engaged us for. So we've got a done for you side of the business where we're doing digital marketing for clients, and then a done by you where there's a bit of sales coaching, there's content coaching, so they can really take that in-house. So the clients where there's a bit of a sales project going on, and especially if they're using HubSpot, that's use any CRM you want, but that's the one we're really good at. We have access to that data already. So it does depend on the scope, Josh, to be honest with you. But some clients will often have a lot of. It doesn't matter who's doing it, whether it's us doing it and they pay us for that, or they're doing it. It's really vital you have that. This is the thing, and there's more sources of data than you realize. Like people are like, oh well, I don't have that data. Well, okay, do you have an AdWords account? Because in your AdWords account, there's a queries report, which is different to the search terms you bid on. I think they call it search terms now. But there's what the words you bid on. You might have bid for, like Interact quiz software, but the customer typed, is Interact a good quiz software, right? So and you still came up. So the things that they actually search for is a different report to what you bid for. That's another source of primary data. It doesn't matter what they say, Josh. So people, oh, well, I'm a startup. Great, go to Reddit. You know what I mean? Like, go to Reddit, go to Amazon, find books that have been written on your topic, and then go into the comments and reviews and read that stuff. Like, there isn't an excuse to not do that primary research.
Hmm. This is a totally different topic, but how do you think that plays into the switch to AI search or people using AI to chat in and try to find an answer? Do you think it's the same process of like answering questions that can surface through the AI chatbot versus Google search, or do you think it's a different approach?
I think this happens every time something comes out, Josh, like VR, and like the same questions were happening when people were talking about voice search, and when Amazon, Alexa, Google Home, these things were becoming quite big. Oh, let's optimize for voice and let's optimize for AI. And then you look at those brands that are talking about that, and they're not even blogging. They're not even doing videos. Like, so to answer your question, Josh, like, yes, you need to, like, I put up a post on my LinkedIn not too long ago, and I literally shared, so obviously Gemini, right? Google search results are coming up with Gemini. And there was a question that I put in, and I was genuinely just interested just to see where we ranked for it. And I was actually quite pleasantly surprised. We came up in the Gemini search, and Gemini is doing something very similar to what Copilot did. It'll have the source there, right? And that is based on our strategy of writing 3 articles per week, which is the best SEO strategy you could do. So you've got to, and what's that strategy based on? Back to what you asked me, Josh, like the questions, concerns, comments, fears that people have in the sales process, in their consideration journey, that they're not asking you because they're not making it to your site, because you're not answering that. So yes, that is the first part of it. Now, yes, of course, there are some little tweaks you can make, but you can't do that until you do part 1. For example, what are the tweaks? Like very, very similar. If you've ever typed anything in Google, it's not too different to the people also ask section. You'll notice it's done in a queries way. So if you're already doing that content, then you should make sure if you're doing an article, these things, they scrape transcripts now too. So word a section in that article or on that video around exactly a Q&A version of that article. My fear is though, Josh, like people hear everything I said, ignore everything and just do that. That is not the way to do it, right?
Mhm.
You have to focus on the basics. You have to become the Wikipedia of your industry, answer those questions, concerns, and comments. And again, that other tip there that was kind of hidden, you need to do it consistently. So we blog 3 times a week, man. I've got a full-time content writer, and we've been doing it for years, and we're still not running out of ideas. So you've got to focus on the fundamentals first.
Yeah, I mean, that just tells me that you're talking to customers all the time, because I can't tell you the number of people that I've heard say like, "Oh, I don't know what to talk about. I don't know what to blog about." And, then you ask them, how often do you talk to your customers? It's like, every once in a while. And I mean, the last stat that I heard is you should spend 5 to 10 hours a week talking to customers if you're in any sort of like customer facing role. I think I agree with that. I don't know where you'd land in terms of how much time you actually need to spend on that, but you definitely have to spend a lot. And I like how this is all shaping up in my head as you're talking about this, because you're talking about the blog answering the questions, you're talking about videos answering questions, and then you're just talking about quizzes answering questions. So it's almost like it's just a category of content, which I love that, because that's what we intended it to be. It's gotten kind of blown out of proportion, where sometimes people think a quiz is a magic bullet that's going to do everything and fix your business problems. It's not. It's just another way to answer the question. So if you're thinking about a portfolio of content for yourself, for a client, like, how do you slot in like what should be video, what should be blog, what should be podcast, what should be quiz? Do you have a process for how you kind of differentiate those things?
Yeah, we do. And I guess it does depend on the industry. It can tweak a little bit. So we follow the They Ask You Answer framework by Marcus Sheridan. And it's a 2-part thing. One, it's a philosophy. The philosophy part is really building that culture of listening to your customer, answering question, concerns, comments. And you were saying earlier, it got me thinking, like all these things tie together. So if we put a quiz on our website, you bet it's going to be a better quiz than someone who doesn't do articles, because we've got such a good feeder. They talk about the quality versus quantity thing, and the short answer is it's a bit of both. But the quantity breeds the quality because you're putting stuff out to the market so much. So like a few years ago, I wanted to play in TikTok, and I blew my TikTok up. And what I noticed, I was putting 4 or 5 content pieces a day. I had like market research and feedback right away, what's working and what's not. And that kind of dictated everything else that I do. The final thing too, and sorry, I know you didn't ask this question, but it's actually, if you're a business owner or C-suite person, it's actually a risk mitigation strategy, because you see the writing on the wall with your industry. So we started as a digital marketing agency, and what I've noticed is there's a bit of a shift, right? So like we're focusing more and more and more on HubSpot, and that's slowly starting to grow the percentage of our revenue. And I do believe that if we actually weren't putting out content, we wouldn't have been able to see the signal. So we're putting out SEO content, Google Ads content, HubSpot content, and that's what's resonating with the market. So we're kind of going with the trend. So I guess the shorter answer to your question, Josh, you should know me by now, but it's like, yeah, so we follow the They Ask You Answer framework, and again, depending on the industry, it is a really good idea to start with written format first. Even if you want to do video really soon, fine, great. Just do 1 or 2 quarters of written first, because that'll feed the video. right? It's hard to do a video and turn it into a blog. I mean, you can do it, but it's so much easier to have blog. You have some data, and you're like, cool, cool. Out of these 10 blogs, these 5 crushed it. Like it's already 80% of a script. It just needs to be added a little bit. It needs a hook, and it needs a spoken word, which is a bit different to script, a written word, and that kind of does it. And then, of course, the other part of that is short form as well. So once you get down the video path, short form, it's really, really important to make sure like they can be the gateway drugs to your long form and to your website and your written content. Hopefully that
Yeah,
answers your question.
no, that totally answers the question, and that's a really good point about like the feedback that you get from the content and when you see which pieces are going up, which pieces are going down, what's getting engagement, what's not. They can tell you what the market wants in a more like aggregated way, I guess, because if you're talking to customers, they'll obviously tell you what they're thinking about, what they're concerned with. But sometimes it doesn't exactly reflect what the overall market is thinking. Like you can almost have a bias of like the spoken word versus what are they actually searching for? Like they can be different
Yeah.
things. And if you know both of them, it's a really good way to have a pulse on the market and know where things are going. So you mentioned a little bit about this, but I was curious because a lot of our listeners are business owners themselves. Like, what are you thinking about in terms of, you said mentioned shifting towards HubSpot. What else are you thinking about as putting on your agency owner hat now? Like, what are the plans and strategies that you're seeing in the market right now?
So it's funny, like if what I'm going to share is it's probably not rocket science, and people may have heard this in different books or other speakers and stuff. But I think the key thing is like as I kind of look back on the year, I've been looking at like okay, what type of customers and what type of services have been really easy for us to sell. Like it didn't feel like we're jamming something down someone's throat. It was really easy to sell. They saw a lot of value, didn't haggle, thanked us, we got reviews for. What is that? And funnily enough, like that, the answer to that question for us wasn't what our traditional business has been. It's been HubSpot, it's been sales enablement, CRM enablement, anything to do with sales and HubSpot, and also marketing as well. That's where it kind of came up. And I'm like, okay, that's really, really interesting. And funnily enough, like the content research thing, you don't do that's not the primary purpose. Like I was talking about before, you create content, you get market feedback. It's just a really nice byproduct. If you do it for that purpose, it's not right, right? But you just get good feedback. So that's kind of been like our journey. And what can we do? Repeat it. And then we're like, okay, well, who's the who? What does the who look like? So for the answers to all those questions, whatever the answer is, who's the who? Like if you had 10 of those day in, day out, which one would you convert the highest? Would be the easiest sell, and you'd love to have those customers. So for us, I'm realizing even though, yeah, we've got a couple of big clients that look really nice on a PowerPoint, like corporates, that's actually not the who. Like it's privately owned businesses. They're $10 million plus businesses. So privately owned $10 million plus business, complex buying journeys or 1 month longer buying journeys, and they normally have a sales team. So all of a sudden, like I know that answer, and then I look to my marketing collateral, and it's not talking to those people, and it's still not talking to those people, right? So that's like the journey we're going down. And then the final piece of that is like, how do you promote it? Like, what's your like EOS, the book called Traction, EOS talks about this, right? EOS is an operating system or a business, they call it a business operating system. They talk about like, what's your process? What's your way? Right. So what's the RedPandas way? What's our 5-step or 6-step or, what's our secret sauce, KFC, 11 herbs and spices? Like, what is it actually? And then when you actually write that down, articulate it, you're like, oh, this is actually quite different from everyone else. And that's why you close at a higher rate. That's why you do so well, because it is quite different and we're not communicating that. So that final piece of that, and this is just sort of our journey anyway, Josh, because you asked, the final piece of that, we're like, okay, can we develop that into a scorecard or like a maturity model, right? And then kind of bringing this back home to quizzes. Once we actually do that, say we build a maturity model and you come in at a score of 10 for your CRM effectiveness, revenue, you'll see it, and I don't have a label, you can completely tell, Josh, but I'll have a label for it, your CRM revenue readiness, whatever, right? You come in, you're a 10. And then obviously we'll work you through and get you to 100, and then you can graduate. But I can use quizzes for that too. So then all of a sudden it becomes like a different deployment of quizzes. But yeah, that's kind of like the focus in terms of what I think about in terms of where should you niche, where should you focus with your business.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's That sounds exactly right. And I think we are constantly doing that at Interact. Like, okay, over the last 6 months, over the last 12 months, who was most successful? Who was just delighted with the result? Who was like, there was so much ROI that this is just a no-brainer. I like the no-brainer concept. Like,
Mm.
who is this a no-brainer for? Just like, yes, this is obvious. It would be not smart for me to not do this. Who are those people? And then, yeah, that's a good point of like, does my content, does my website reflect who those people are? And we're constantly updating our website, our content, our, brand to reflect who it is. And I would say I've had more conversations in the last 18 months with people where all of that is changing than in the previous 10 years combined. So I think that it's a pretty common thing, and I think people hearing you talk through how you're going about it is helpful. It's helpful for me to hear it because it's like, yeah, that is the process that you go through when you are almost you're like refining product market fit. Not that you don't have it with like your existing clients and they're not happy, but as you want to move forward, what do you want your product market
Mm.
fit to look like? I think it's a really prescient point, and I appreciate that. The last question I have, just for my own curiosity, is that I think we've been at this similar amounts of time. What is it that motivates you? What keeps you going? What are you excited about that, keeps you locked into enjoying this job for so long?
Such a good question. I'm going to keep this as short as possible, but it's very timely because I've got a coach, business coach. Shout out to Chris Ma, and what he's been helping me with is, as we know, we kind of head into the next year, is like a vision for the team. Because it's kind of like, and it's really, really important, right? So when Steve Jobs got the head of, PepsiCo at the time to be head of marketing or whatever, he said to him, like, do you really want to be selling sugary water for the rest of your life?
Hmm.
Right? Like, we're building something great here. Now, people listening might be like, yeah, Moby, but that's Apple. Like, they've got it. Yeah, but that's only because they created that vision for you. They're just a computer company. Like, or they were just a computer company back then. They were just like Dell and IBM, and no one would, see them as this big sort of vision, right? So one of the things that I've been challenged on by my coach, and I've been refining, is what's our why? Like, what gets me out of, and especially for small business owners or founder-led business owners are listening to this, it has to be an extension of why you started your business. So my coach really, really sort of challenged me on it. And at first, to be honest, Josh, my answer was, well, I want to make a ton of money and exit, right? He's like, why did you get into it in the first place? And then what it kind of went back to was, like when I was younger. So obviously I'm born in Australia and stuff, but I kind of, and like I'm brown. I was working in the workplace maybe less than 10 years removed from September 11th. And Australia was like a really racist place there. I'm sure a lot of a lot of Western countries were, right? Like, I'll give you
Mm-hmm.
a quick example. Like, someone once introduced me, like, oh, meet Moby. He's not bad, like, for a Muslim guy or for a brown guy. And at the time, Josh, it was one of those like insults that I didn't even know it was an insult at the time. Like, I'm like, I smiled, but like, it didn't feel right. And I went away and I'm like, oh, like, like, oh, that wasn't very nice. So why am I sharing all this? Well, I went from that to then walking into any boardroom. Like, I've spoken to audiences more than 500 people, and people like eating out of palm of my hand, taking down notes and stuff. So I went from someone who was like, I'd be the person ignored in a room, to someone with authority, and someone that they want to actually. So it's not about my ego, it's about them taking my advice and impacting their business. So why am I sharing all this, Josh? Like, I guess founders need to have that. They need to really think about, like, why do they do what they do? What gets them out? Why do they exist? What vision are they going to sell to their team? Because, like, Josh, we're a small business, right? Most of my staff could easily get higher salaries working for bigger companies, easily. So there has to be something, and you can't have the excuse of, oh, we're not an Apple or whatever. You have to find that. So for us, and the reason why I shared that story, what I realized, for me, it's about impact. And it's two sides of the coin. One, seeing leaders and develop internally. Luckily for me, I actually do like people, and luckily for me, I really do like culture. So that's been like the biggest thing for us from an internal point of view. But why I get in day in, day out is and that's why I said privately owned businesses. I think I might have said that a while ago. Because with corporates, I can't make a big impact. They don't care. Like, I had a corporate drop me the other day. We've been with them for 8 years. Like, thank you so much. But with privately owned business, I can make an impact. So I guess that's my long way of sort of saying for us, and we're refining this right now in a way where we can communicate it to the business and then they can communicate that to their friends, family, is it's the impact that we have on the lives of people. So like, you know, we're helping businesses and they've got wives and husbands and kids and they're trying to put kids through college and they're trying to hire people and they're trying to promote them. Like they're doing, and we're helping that. So my whole thing to the team is going, and we have, I say it will be because we're having an offsite soon, is like, guys, you're not just doing a HubSpot project. You're not just helping someone with their content. You're making an impact in their life, in their business, and don't forget that. So hopefully that answers your question and that wasn't too fluffy, but that
No,
is the process I'm going through and every founder should, in my
no,
opinion.
that's super powerful. I mean, that story of this is Moby, he's not bad. That I felt that in my gut, like that's like a gut punch. I think it's very commendable. You totally could have taken it the other way and just like been, hated people, but you didn't. You took it the opposite way of that, where you're like, oh, I want to make an impact. I want to help people, and that's how. I think what I heard you saying is like that's how I'll be powerful. I'll be powerful by helping, and to me, that's the most powerful you can be. Like the hero's journey, right? You're the guide on the hero's journey. That's the most powerful character. It's not necessarily because they're getting all the accolades, but it's because they help the people get what they're trying to get. And I think that's incredible. And people do respond to that. Like you said, people could go make more money somewhere else, but at the end of the day, right? Like why would you work hard all the time just for money? Like it doesn't last. And I think people listening can resonate with that a lot too. It's like, yes, there's life stuff. You got to make money. Like after that, why do it for so long? And that's why I was curious to know your answer, because I know you've been doing this a long time and it makes sense that you've thought about it a lot and you have a very solid answer to that question.
And there's a lesson in that too. Storytelling really works. When my coach didn't have the answer for me, he just guided me. He's like, think back. So, you said I shared that story and that touched you. Like the whole point of that, and if you do that to your team, they will think back to versions of themselves and who they are now. So, yeah, it's all powerful stuff. And I think there is a method to that madness for sure when it comes to storytelling.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that stuff like really, it really matters. And it's what makes us human, right?
Human.
It's like
Yeah.
everybody has some story of feeling rejected or feeling hurt or feeling less than or stepped on or whatever it is. And that's the type of stuff that you can take that and use that to fuel you in a really positive direction or a negative direction. But if you choose the positive direction, it's very powerful. And I think that's awesome. Before we sign off, if anybody's listening to this and they're like, I want to go work with Red Pandas on my quizzes because that sounds great, where can they go submit an inquiry or chat with somebody on your team?
Yeah, just redpandasplural.com.au. I'm really active on LinkedIn, as you know, Josh, so connect with me as well there. And yeah, we work with actually a lot of clients on the Pacific time zone in America as well. But yeah, happy to kind of give people a second opinion for sure. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you again. I appreciate it. This was awesome to reconnect after all these years.
Thanks, Josh.